So I have had it. For about 4 years now people have been whining about how Capcom is making the wrong decision for choosing to remake Resident Evil 4 over Code Veronica. All this noise about how a Resident Evil 4 remake is pointless. This idea that most Resident Evil fans want a Code Veronica remake over Resident Evil 4 or just in general is absurd. You really think a game that sold poorly on all systems it was released on is the top priority that most gamers or even Resident Evil fans want? And I will also admit, I am sort of guilty of this. Before I beat Code Veronica last August I would have loved to see Code Veronica Remake to see what they could improve. However, after beating the game I can safely say this game should be forgotten and even retconned from the timeline because holy shit, was that a bad game and story. Also, I am so done with seeing stuff like this on screen when it comes to Code Veronica. The hypocrisy is insane with these Code Veronica fans, and let's break down why. So many people who love Code Veronica's story also loves to whine about how Resident Evil 4's story is awful, but Code Veronica's story is arguably more trash, with you finding out Claire could have just emailed Leon at the beginning of the game and not go to some random island, only to get captured and do some stupid action movie moves in the opening cutscene. Which, by the way, I thought that was what made Resident Evil 4 so bad compared to previous Resident Evil games, was that it was too action-focused and over-the-top. Yet Code Veronica introduced Matrix Wesker and Alexia having a blood fire attack, which for some reason is not over-the-top whatsoever according to you poop-loving Code Veronica fans. Resident Evil 4's story is at least somewhat entertaining because it's very much based off of what you would expect in an 80s action movie, while Code Veronica is just got the most nonsense story that I cannot believe anyone would say in real life with a straight face was good. Number 1. Code Veronica has some of the worst bosses in the series. There are multiple parts in the game where you can get stuck with no warning at all. Number 3. The character switching is done so horribly in this game compared to Resident Evil 2. Number 4. This game has the worst backtracking and padding in the series. Now, with all those reasons, you should somewhat see why I think Code Veronica should not only have no time and money wasted by Capcom to remake it, but it should be forgotten. The game is just unsalvageable and a remake just isn't worth it. It will change so many things like Alfred and Wesker that this part of the Resident Evil lore needs to be retconned ASAP. In my opinion, I think Resident Evil 4 Remake can continue where Resident Evil 3 Remake left off, and we already know that the lore has already been altered to make the continuity much more sound this time around. There is no need for mentioning Code Veronica again in the new timeline, and Capcom could retcon it completely if the leaks about a Resident Evil 1 remake for the 30th anniversary in 2026 are true. Just have a canon ending where Wesker gets away but is hurt by the tyrant at the end. If they really want to go crazy, they can sell DLC for Resident Evil 1 remake showing Wesker recruit Ada after RE2 remake and set up for the RE4 remake, which was a huge success for Capcom, and instead of leaving it for a spin-off like they did in 2007's Umbrella Chronicles. Anyway, I want to talk more about why Resident Evil Code Veronica seems to have such a loud vocal minority that seem to believe it should be held up with the best Resident Evil games. First up, people keep bringing up its Metacritic score as to why it is one of the best games ever. Well, guess what? The gaming media was so much smaller. Code Veronica might have a 94 on Metacritic, but that game only had 18 people review it on Dreamcast. The next year, Code Veronica X would launch on PS2 and only got a 84 on Metacritic, showing the score was way too high to begin with, and this got reviewed by 21 people. Resident Evil 4 on GameCube got a 96 on Metacritic and was reviewed by 82 people. later the PS2 version came out and also scored a 96 on Metacritic. That shows you that at the time there was bias towards Code Veronica, and I think I know what it was. Back in the day when Dreamcast was trying to survive before the launch of the PlayStation 2, we got a bunch of the Sega-loving gaming press inflate the score of Code Veronica. The PS2 had a lot of people downplaying it before launch, kind of like what we see with the PS5 20 years later, and any Dreamcast exclusive was given special treatment by so many critics. That includes Code Veronica, which was touted by even Capcom as their way to save Sega at the time. Think of Code Veronica as the Halo Infinite of the Resident Evil franchise. Halo Infinite won Player's Choice Awards at the Game Awards 2021 by the fans to try to help Xbox look good against PlayStation early in the generation, only for it to be completely forgotten about less than a year later. Once news broke out in January of 2022 that Microsoft was purchasing Activision and would own Call of Duty, Xbox fans quickly forgot about Halo Infinite, especially when news of local co-op was cancelled. You can say the same for Code Veronica. It was being promoted as taking advantage of the Dreamcast hardware, and even Shinji Mikami stated at the time he didn't like working on PS2, so once Sega fans heard of this, the scores were inflated by the gaming press, especially by Next Generation magazine and Electronic Gaming Monthly. Then when the PS2 version came out about a year later, it was already scoring much worse, since it wasn't a Dreamcast killer app. Honestly, I am super glad the PS2 wrecked the Dreamcast, and also super happy Capcom barely mentions Code Veronica nowadays, as I cannot tell which fan base is genuinely more insufferable. Much like the Dreamcast and Sega in the console business, Code Veronica is much better off being straight up forgotten. We do not need to reimagine this trash right here.
Trying to oppose me. Now feel my revenge.
Sick freak!
Like seriously, you guys think I'm the weird one for not wanting to see this worthless game again?